now that you have access to everything and anything you could possibly think of via internet, kind of to what you were saying just a little bit earlier about sort of like the scene that we kind of came up in Connecticut. You had to go outside to have exposure to something. You had to actually like go somewhere and see other kids. You had to like do things. Now you could like become an expert on anything by just doing some chat GPT and fucking Google or whatever.
Well, thank you, Erik and Jeff, for doing this. Thanks, guys.
Absolutely. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. This is a podcast about the both of you and your journey with the band, and we'll talk about the album coming out.
Sure. Sounds good to me. Where are you recording from? Where are you based?
I'm in Nashville.
Nashville. How's it been out there?
It's been great. We moved here a couple of years ago. I'm originally from San Diego, and I spent some time in San Francisco.
Oh, okay.
As well.
Cool.
Nice.
But yeah,
nice.
My family and we moved to Nashville like in the very beginning of 2021.
Okay. Yeah. Got to get out of California during the pandemic.
Yeah. And we got kids and we needed more space and the whole thing. So it all kind of came together, but we love it out here. It's great. It's definitely different from California for sure.
Sure.
Yeah. I have an old friend of mine who's Nashville based, and yeah, it's a cool vibe out there. I haven't been out there much, but it definitely has its own cool vibe. It's also really beautiful, but yeah. Are we playing Nashville?
We are.
Cool. Yeah. You'll have to come out maybe if you're around, Adam.
No, I will be. Let me see. I saw you. Well, you guys are playing the fest, which I thought was rad. But I did see your tour. I can't remember.
I don't remember either, but it's
May. Then
sometime
May.
in May.
Yeah.
Okay. It's fast approaching.
Very end. Yeah. We're
very,
like a month
very
out.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Jeff, it looks like you're about to start rapping or something. Like you're about to like bust out a line or two.
Well, you're the one with the beanie, so
it's true. But I have a mic stand at least.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I am not professional at all.
It's awesome.
Anyway,
I love it. Cool. So I guess I always start off. Were you guys both the band? What originally started in Connecticut? Is that what I read?
Yeah.
Are you both originally from there?
Both originally from Connecticut. We grew up there. That's kind of where it all started. This band originally started when we were, it's crazy to say now, but when we were kids, I think I was like 19. Jeff, you're, around the same age. I mean, we're around the same age, a couple of years apart, but we grew up in Connecticut, and the mid to late 90s was kind of an interesting time for punk, for hardcore, and for, a young band to try and make their own path. It was kind of an interesting time. So, but yeah, we started this band in 97, went till 2001, and then we had this huge gap, and then we decided to resurrect it in 2017, 2018, and now we're like more pedal to the metal than we've ever been. So it's kind of a weird timeline for this band, but yeah, really happy to be back at it,
Yeah, I mean, I listened to the record you put out. I think it was 2019, kind of after you announced guys are doing this again,
right?
And it's it doesn't. It's like seamless. It doesn't feel like that you guys ever really stopped doing it, and then to come like 17 years, 18 years later, and put an album out I was shocked just how seamless it ran from your old songs.
Well, I'll take that as a compliment. It was more daunting behind closed doors to create that record after being away from it for so long.
Mm-hmm.
We basically wrote and recorded that record when we were three different places in the country. I was in LA at the time. Jeff was in SF, and our friend Nick, who's no longer playing with us, but Nick was still in Connecticut, still is, I think. We don't know where he is, but he's probably okay. But either way, it was just a weird time and very ambitious thing to take on. And what we realized when we were making that record upon our return was it required more. It's like when we're making this music, it requires a very particular headspace and frame of mind. and it requires us to tap into a very particular place. And so to kind of just go full throttle with no oil at all, basically, like after 17, 18 years of not being in a room together, not being in this frame of mind, it was kind of an interesting process to arrive to what we did with the LP we made in 2019. But in retrospect, looking back on it, it's almost like that was a sort of like dress rehearsal for where we're at now. It's almost like, while I think it's really nice that you're saying it feels seamless, for us, it's almost like we had to dust everything off after not playing for so long, after not playing live for so long. And yeah, so we're really grateful for having had that opportunity to make that record and to do so much touring afterwards. And I think that's what really helped us get back to where we are, was the amount of touring we did leading up to the pandemic. So if you as you can imagine, we're ready to get back to it this month, or next month. It's fast approaching. So
yeah, I felt like,
and oh, sorry, go ahead, Jeff. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No worries. So I felt like, yeah, it took playing live for us to really feel like we'd finally come back to where we needed to be to do what we needed to do. I didn't feel fully in it until we started rehearsing for all our touring in 2019. So
interesting. So you wrote the record before the live shows, obviously.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, and I didn't mean it's seamless in the way like it sounds like you wrote the same record. I just meant like it doesn't.
Oh no, totally.
I feel like you guys you brought the same, like it it gelled the same way as like you had never stopped playing. I guess it was my
absolutely. No, totally.
Like it sounded like the same record you guys put out before.
Not at all. It wasn't received that way at all.
Okay.
It just prompted the thought of like looking back at it and then seeing how much has changed since then. It almost feels like a lifetime ago, even though it was just a few years ago. But I think, having taken on that as like a return and to try and make this record after not being a band for so long, and then suddenly having a full tour schedule the rest of the year, and basically we having a schedule into 2020, it was just an interesting time, because we basically got thrown back into it so hard, because our touring schedule following the release of that record was like, I mean, it was a dream come true, because we toured with so many great bands. We did tours with Touche Amore, Soul Glow, Loma Prieta, Gouge Away, Daughters, like Vane, just a ton of really great bands. And we totally got the rug pulled out from under us, just like every other touring band, when the pandemic hit. And we were scheduled to return to Europe. And ironically, we were scheduled to play Russia for the first time. And obviously that ship has sailed.
Oh, wow.
So it's like, it's weird to look back on that, because now it's like a lifetime ago. There's a war between that. There's a lot of things that happened between then and now. So where we're at now, it's kind of like this new chapter that we're so grateful to arrive at. It's like we made this new record. Our friend Sean, who is also in Loma Prieta, joined the band during the pandemic. I had moved to San Francisco from LA, so I'm now in proximity to Jeff and Sean. It was a real shift, and it was just like everything just kind of aligned. I mean, the pandemic kind of derailed everybody. But in the middle of that, we rallied and really tried to make things kind of merge into each other again. So that's, I think, what happened when I moved here. We were able to kind of recollect ourselves and regroup and be like, okay, what's next? What are we going to do? How are we going to operate? Where are we going to like find the spark to kind of get back into some kind of rhythm or routine of creativity? Because I don't know about you, but I personally got very like emotionally derailed, and the kind of being in this unknown territory, the kind of ambiguity of not knowing where the world was going. I didn't feel compelled to do anything creatively. I was just kind of sitting every day, like wondering what the next day was going to bring, as far as like, you know, what all the experts were reporting on what this virus was, where it came from, how it's affecting the entire world. Is just like, what the fuck, you know? All I want to do is like play music with my friends and go outside without having to wear a mask.
Mhm.
And finally, after how many years now? 2, 3, 4 years, like
It's
almost
insane.
half a
Yeah.
decade. Like now it kind of feels like we can do that, you know, somewhat
Yeah.
safely.
I know it is wild to think it was like when it happened. It's wild to think that the whole entire world was shut down. It wasn't like a
Yeah.
localized thing or a, you know,
Yeah.
just the United States
Like-
or whatever. It's like
humanity as we know it shifted, you know, together.
yeah. And I mean, I interviewed somebody earlier this morning that was in Romania, and they were telling me this. You know, they're in across the world, and like, yeah, during the pandemic, you know, like it's like, wait, it's just so bizarre to
Right, like this common thing, this common denominator between
that everyone
everyone.
can relate to. Yeah, like in the whole world, it's just unfortunately that's the thing everyone has to relate to. But it's wild that that's how it kind of unfolded.
Yeah,
But
Yeah.
yeah, it's well, and it was supposed to be
I
like
think
2
you
weeks
froze
or
Adam.
something.
Oh, there you go.
No,
Sorry, repeat that.
I said I think it was supposed to be for like 2 weeks. We were supposed to flatten the curve or something.
That's what I thought. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, just to back up here a little bit, if you don't mind, like, did Jeff, you or Eric, did either of you come from a musical household at all?
Not really. I mean,
Okay.
my parents, my dad was super into oldies and old country, and or I wouldn't say super into, but that's what was around for him. He used to have these old like, remember the old tapes you'd get, or CDs from like Time Life or whatever? You'd see the commercial on TV, order these, and you know, for like $49.99 or whatever.
Oh yeah.
He had one of those collections in his car, and I would always be like, Dad, let's listen to this. And you know, so lots of oldies. My mom.
Wait, were
was
they
into-
CDs or cassettes?
They were cassettes. Yeah, I mean,
Nice.
back in the 80s. But my
Right.
mom was into classical music, so you know, there was music on, but it was never really it wasn't at the forefront. My dad had this girlfriend who had these 2 older kids who were really mean, really brutal, and they were like into metal and, you know, like Iron Maiden and stuff. And but I was a little kid, you know, I'm like 4 or 5, and you know, I remember seeing the cover for 666, Number of the Beast, just around the house, and I'm like, oh, it's really scary, you know. And they'd like terrorize me, and I'm sure some of that stuck with me, but
Forever traumatized.
forever. Yeah. Now I put that on around my kid, and he doesn't bat an eye, you know. He's like, oh, that's cool, you
That's
know.
funny.
Yeah.
Well, what about like, did you pick up a guitar or anything early on? I mean, or bass?
No, I didn't start playing until high school.
Oh, wow.
Like towards the end of high school, even. You know, there was, you know, Nirvana was happening, and then I don't know, Green Day came out. I was pretty into Green Day, you know, stuff like that was going on around. And so I started to get more into music. Actually, I got into 9 Inch Nails right before Nirvana came out. I was thinking 7th grade, and Head Like a Hole came out, and that really grabbed me. I was like, ooh, that's how I feel, you know.
Right.
So so I started getting into music around middle school, high school, and you know, then I saw a band and felt compelled to pick up a bass and start a band. So
But in the I mean, the genre of music you guys make, was there like a scene of people that you kind of associated with? Like, I mean, to go from a Nirvana or 9 Inch Nails to like the music that you guys write and put out is quite a jump. You know what I mean?
Eric can speak better to that than I can.
Okay. Yeah.
Well,
so Eric, what about you? Musical household?
yeah, I mean, I always give props to my older sister, because when I was younger, like in a playpen, I remember my playpen was next to we had like this kind of crappy upright piano in the house, and my sister took piano lessons. So when I was in the playpen, she would be practicing piano. So I had this kind of immediate exposure when I was younger. to an actual instrument being played next to me. But a few years later, when I was kind of aware of my surroundings, again, I always think about the old days with my older sister, you know, having a slew of music comprised of like The Cure, The Smiths, In Excess, Depeche Mode. You know, she even had a couple Iron Maiden LPs, a Van Halen LP. I remember 5150, I think. But it's funny because she had LPs, but I don't remember her having a record player. I don't know why she. Oh, wait, no, my parents had a record player like downstairs, but in her room she had all these cassettes and like a stack of LPs always leaned against the wall. But the one thing that really I think opened the door for me as far as what Jeff was alluding to when it came to like what was visceral for him or what he kind of like really resonated with, was this compilation cassette tape that my sister had that I had no idea what was on it, but it was like this weird mix of like old industrial stuff or like even like techno stuff paired with what I think I remember it being kind of like the Cramps and like old skate rock stuff and just she just had a tape, I think, that was given to her by some kids because she went to like an after school art program outside the city, and she was hanging out with all these punk kids. And my sister wasn't really a punk, but I think just her proximity to other kids who were into that, she kind of got a little bit of exposure to it, and somehow it kind of bled over to me. And when I was a kid, you know, I was exposed to skateboarding at an early age, and that paired with the music kind of created this world for me. I was just enamored by the music, the old videos that I saw when I was a kid. You know, I'd go over a friend's house and they would play like a VHS cassette of like the old Bones Brigade videos, and
Oh yeah,
it just totally like blew my world wide open. So that, alongside, you know, taking violin lessons when I was in 3rd to like 7th grade, and you know, until I discovered the drum set in the band room in school, and I played for the first time, and when I, you know, the drum set was just like set up in this band room with no lights on, but the kit was there. There's a pair of sticks. I was at school after school doing violin rehearsal, or I was in the school orchestra. But when I played the drums, I knew right then and there that I wanted to just do that. So I quit violin the next year and begged my parents to buy me a drum set for 2 years until they caved in. They got me like this really shitty drum set. I was around 12 years old. So I'm fast forwarding a little bit. I finally got this kit. And it's funny because that first drum set was the drum set that I played the first JD songs, you know? So like,
wow. So you had it for that long? Wow.
yeah, I had it until the very end of our first iteration, which was 2001. And it was a really crappy kit, but it sounded pretty okay.
It sounded great. And you were really always very careful and particular with it. So yeah.
Well, I mean, I ripped off the laminate off the shells and then I stained it like a green color. Like I you know, I actually kind of fucked it up, I think, but maybe that's what made it sound okay. I don't know.
Unique.
Cool.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. I don't know where it is now though. I left it somewhere. I think Nick, our old guitarist, he had a friend where we were storing the kit for like a long time, and it's probably somewhere in a basement in Connecticut. I have no idea, but
that sucks.
But yeah, I don't know if I'd even want it anymore, to be honest. Like,
really? Because I know people that, you know, guitar players will keep the first guitar that they get or whatever. But I guess a drum set's a little bit more space that you need for it.
Yeah. Well, Jeff has the original bass that he played with in the early days.
Do you still play it today, Jeff, or no?
It's just sitting there dusty.
I don't think it works.
It needs a lot of work. Yeah.
That's awesome though.
Yeah. I the guys in Vain, a couple of years back, they were like, do you still have that old bass? And I was like, yeah. And I was like, you want it? And they were like, yeah. And they were going to come to my house and pick it up. I would think I was going to be out of town or something, but it ended up happening. So
I think you should hang on to it.
I would too. I was going to say,
I just don't have anywhere to put it. It's just like there. So, but yeah, for nostalgia, I'm not a super nostalgic person, but yeah,
I hear you.
I still have it. So
that's awesome though. It's cool to hear, Eric, you said that because I grew up skateboarding in San Diego, and like that was how I was really got into music was those old skate videos, like
Yeah.
the first Toy Machine videos. Like that's where I found out about Iron Maiden, to speak to that. Like Jamie
Yeah.
Thomas skated when Iron to Hell Would Be Thy Name. Like, Danzig came out of that for me. Like these bands that I didn't know anything about, but I would hear them on the skate video, and then I would go watch the credits at the end of the video, and then go and buy the record or whatever it was. But that's really how I kind
Totally.
of stumbled into music as well. I think it's cool to see that. That was a cool culture.
I think
I just think it's cool that there were all kinds of genres were coming out too. So it was just like really diverse and interesting, and just, yeah. I mean, you say the culture, there's that total skate culture of the 80s and 90s was just, it was really, really cool. I skated too. I wasn't very good, but I was into it too. So
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I think was really special, or one of the things that was really special about those days, because now that you have access to everything and anything you could possibly think of via internet,
Mm-hmm.
kind of to what you were saying just a little bit earlier about sort of like the scene that we kind of came up in Connecticut. You had to go outside to have exposure to something. You had to actually like go somewhere and see other kids. You had to like do things. Now you could like become an expert on anything by just doing some chat GPT and fucking Google or whatever. It's like, it's not the same, because, revolving around this conversation with regard to the intersect between music, in underground culture at the time, skateboarding was still like very underground in the 90s, and like, I feel like the cross-pollination of music and skateboarding for me, and the feeling it gave me, it's like irreplaceable. And when you look back on it, it's extremely formative when you discover a band like Husker Du or Bad Religion, or even like, I mean, I was familiar with Beastie Boys' License to Ill when it came out. I had the cassette tape, but then when Plan B came out with, I think, Questionable Reality, and and what was it? Check Your Head. Like there's several songs of Check Your Head that was on that video, or in that video rather. It's like, oh fuck, like there's crossover here. There's like these skaters, these kids are like listening to what I'm listening to, or they're like listening to things that like I think sound awesome, and it suddenly kind of creates this world. I'm it's funny that we're talking about this. I'm thinking about one of the first Blind videos. It's called Video Days. I don't know if you remember that one. It's like Jason Lee, Mark Gonzalez, Guy
It just
Mariano.
had the guy with the Reaper on the cover. I think was just the cover of it, like in the corner. I think I had that VHS tape.
Yeah, it's like when they're like driving drunk in the fucking Cadillac in the beginning of the video or something.
Yeah.
But like, you can like watch this video, and one guy's part has like a Jackson 5 song, and then the other guy's part has like, some like jazz number from someone, and then the next part has like some punk rock song. So there's like this like real diversity too, in terms of the mix of different music, but still kind of associated with skateboarding. So I always thought that was kind of cool, that at least skateboard culture always, like, it was always mixed up, but it even made like Jackson 5 feel like underground or something. Like it felt like there was like a special connection, knowing that like a Jackson 5 song was being used to a Mark Gonzalez skate part. It's like, but anyway, in Connecticut, there was a lot of skaters. There was a big graffiti scene back then. There's a lot of crossover too between the hardcore scene, graffiti, skateboarding. It was all kind of happening at once, all together. There was a rave scene that was kind of left of center of all that was happening in the mid 90s. And Jeff and I, we became friends through the punk scene. And we met at this all ages venue called the Tune In, and a mutual friend of ours introduced us, and long story short, said that like, you guys should be in a band together, because our friend knew that I played drums, and our friend knew that Jeff was trying to start a band. And so we're like, oh yeah, well, how's it going, whatever. And then we found ourselves practicing like a week or two later. Like we didn't really waste that much time. And then before we knew it, we kind of just had this thing that was ours, you know, between myself, Jeff, and Nick at the time. It was like we were carving out our own space creatively. Like, okay, we can get in a room behind our instruments and we can make noise. We can try and make songs, and maybe we could play a show. Like maybe we could, I don't know, like put out a record. We just kind of built this thing together. And then even though we were individually in the scene for however many years prior, it all started when we kind of created this band for us. Like it really officially started for us, I think, because I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like we had like we created this epicenter to work off of, and the epicenter was the band. The epicenter was JD, and from that we kind of carved our own way, not without, you know, it was hard. It was hard in the beginning. You know, we always felt like outcasts. We always felt like the underdog. We always felt like we had to really like we really wanted to like find our place, but it didn't come without resistance or kind of like just like a shrugging off. Like we weren't like friends with everyone already. It's almost like we came out of nowhere and people were like, what the fuck is this? You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because
And
were there bands in Connecticut that you were seeing that were in kind of your same realm, like more of that just like really heavy, fast music?
I think it was less heavy and fast and more like traditional, like I guess you would call it just emo. Connecticut had a really heavy um emphasis on youth crew and like metalcore, because it was sandwiched between New York and Boston. So you'd have bands like Overcast from Boston or from Massachusetts area, and then you would have bands, you know, like fucking Madball and 25 to Life and
Yeah.
you know, Sick of It All, which is a great band, but Connecticut almost got like this weird crossover of those subgenres of punk or hardcore. But then there was like this offshoot of these other bands. Like I remember, and Jeff, you can chime in, of course. Like I'm thinking of like the Willimantic scene, like bands
Vain.
like In Vain,
In Vain. Yeah.
Cable.
Oh, yeah.
You know, another band called Cable, who ended up signing to Hydra Head at some point. But they again were like this, you know, very little known band that was doing something different. And I think Jeff and I, like sonically, like our sonic aesthetics were really aligned in terms of what we kind of were seeking. You know, like everyone knew about the sonic youths of the world, or like the, you know, but we were like we wanted to go deeper back then. You know, it's like we knew that like Hatebreed was kind of like blazing their path in as Connecticut hardcore. Like Hatebreed at the time was like the biggest band from Connecticut, or in like getting big, you know, getting popular beyond Connecticut. But there was all of these smaller bands that never got the shine. You know, they kind of toured locally or like the tri-state area, but they never like went beyond that. So there's a lot of stories and there's a lot of history in Connecticut as far as underground music. And I think JD was almost in the middle of these different worlds. And then we kind of created our own with an indirect influence from all of them. And I think JD hasn't always been, well, maybe there's, I would say less so heavy, but more so in like there's an intensity and intention to what we make, you know,
Yeah,
and
no,
how we
for
write
sure.
and how we express it. Cause it really comes from an expressive standpoint. And I think, yeah, it just became its own thing. And then there were bands in the area that we became acquainted with. You know, Orchid shared a couple members from Connecticut, but they were kind of Massachusetts based. There were bands like, you know, Tipping Canoe, who we weren't like really acquainted with, but they were in the circle of another Massachusetts band. There was a band called Josta 14, who Jamie Shanahan from Hatebreed first started when he was a kid.
Wow.
And and Just a 14, when Jamie left and did his thing with Hatebreed, Just a 14 kind of did a similar thing where they took a huge pivot as far as their sonic palette. Like it changed, you know, they kind of went more into that like melodic kind of like emo route. And you know, a lot of bands were doing that.
What about
But
bands? What about like Converge? Were they a band that you guys would let's see? I mean,
yeah,
they're like a Massachusetts band that has a
yep,
you know, in
yeah. I
that
mean,
same vein, I would imagine, because they came
we
around. They were around in their 90s as well,
mhm.
I believe.
Yeah, we played with Converge when we were a younger band, and it was like the biggest thing. Like, oh my God, we're playing with Converge and ISIS. Like, holy
Oh
shit.
wow!
It was
Oh,
it
so
was
they
at
were
like a
massive
college.
at that. They were pretty big. See, I remember
Yeah.
seeing them like in '99 or something, and they had they people were there, and it was a sold out show in San Diego. But mind you, it was at the Che, which is probably like
Oh,
100
nice.
people. But
Yeah.
still, for a band from Boston to come and sell that out, it was a big deal.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Converge was, I always see Converge as like, you know, one of the bigger bands. I mean, they've always been out the gates. They've always been like a badass band,
Hmm.
you know, like just, yeah, one of the best. And, you know, I mean, yeah, we can talk about it forever. How many bands
Sure, but there
came
was
from?
something happening, obviously, in Connecticut, and you guys were obviously a
Definitely.
part of that
Yeah.
scene. Yeah, I was just kind of ignorant to it all. I know that uh,
Yeah.
obviously the East Coast bred so many and does so much of that music and that genre, and
Yeah.
being on the West Coast, I mean, we had like the Locust, and maybe I'm trying to even think of anyone else like really at that
Jenny
time.
Piccolo.
Oh yeah, like at the time, like there wasn't that big of a scene coming through, I felt like.
Sure.
Well,
I
I
would.
also Unbroken, right? Were you familiar with Unbroken back in the day?
No.
Yeah, another hardcore band from San Diego. I think they were a little bit earlier than, I
Okay.
think, you know,
I
early
might have been a
90s, mid
little too
90s.
young. I was
Swing Kids era.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Swing Kids.
okay. That was a little bit before me. I'm thinking like maybe Cattle Decapitation was around that time. I don't know. I'm
Sure.
trying to
Yeah.
think.
I do want to say, I do want to make the point though that while all these things were happening around us, there was not really a similarity for us. We
Okay.
were sort of out in our own land,
Yeah.
pulling influences indirectly from things, but there was never like a band that we could really attach to, at least in Connecticut. Erik did say, Orchid or whatever. I guess Connecticut's a small place, but we were always just sort of on our own, in our own place.
Yeah, and you can
When
hear that in I mean, in your songs versus if you were to, it's not, yeah, you don't sound like those bands. I was just kind of thinking in that mindset of like similarity in a sense of like
Yeah.
maybe the same kids, or if there was parties or shows that you would play that would be
Yeah, I mean,
similar genre.
there I think back then there was things were less compartmentalized in like genres. Like
Right.
there weren't bills that were just metal bills, or you know like y- a heavy band would be playing with like an acoustic, like an acoustic player with like a drum machine or something, or a lot of the shows at the Tune In, which was the all ages DIY venue in New Haven, Connecticut. I mean, there'd be shows where like, you know, there'd be like a fucking ska band playing with a hardcore band or a youth crew band. Like it was all mixed up. Or it's just like there is more diversity in the actual bills, and things were
Mhm.
less like segmented as like, okay, this is a you know a youth crew show, or this is a metalcore show, or this is a this and that. It's like there was so much more diversity, and it was more celebrated, I think,
Yeah, I
and
like that. I feel like that is a lost thing
yeah,
nowadays.
and we've always been a band to celebrate that diversity. So even when we were kind of up and running eventually, and we were touring everywhere, and we were super active, we were really deliberate in like wanting to share bills with different types of bands. Like we all felt that everyone was punk or everyone was underground, but JD would play with bands like Braid, or
Oh
we would
yeah.
or we would share a bill with a band like Rye Coalition or Paul Newman or a lot of these bands that aren't necessarily in our circles, but we were brushing elbows with them back then. And for us as kids, we thought it was cool because, again, to what Jeff was saying, like our exposure to these types of bands, especially like a lot of West Coast, San Diego hardcore, just California hardcore in general, bands like Honeywell, Angel Hair, Portraits of Past, Swing Kids. We were obviously very familiar with Locust at the time because they were super active when we were playing. Jeff was buying all of these records from these bands. And if we weren't playing or rehearsing, we were listening to records quite literally. Like we would sit in Jeff's room and like put records on and just sit there and listen to shit on repeat. Like I can't tell you how many times we've listened to like two records stand out right now. Of course, the Portraits of Past LP. And then Jeff, remember Piebald, When Life Hands You Lemons?
Oh, I love that record.
Great record.
That's so funny. I have a Piebald album on I've had Travis on my show before.
Oh, cool. Yeah,
so I have
props to him, because Piebald back then was also a band. We listened to it and it's like, oh wow, like this guy's kind of singing and it's like it's like poppy and it's melodic, but it's still underground. It's like, this is cool, and like at the time we couldn't even do that if like you like, I don't know, held a gun to our head. Like we didn't know what we were doing. Like we couldn't play our instruments, and maybe that's why it was just noisy and feedbacky. And like, we were like, I don't know, like we're just trying to figure it out. I mean, I think a lot of bands, especially when you start off younger, you're just trying to figure it out, But Piebald was, again, Piebald was kind of in the same camp as like Converge and Caven, like another Massachusetts band.
Oh yeah, Caven was great. Or they were.
I mean, there must have been something in the water, because Massachusetts, when I think about it now, has like spawned some pretty impressive bands who are still like out there in the conversation. Case in point, Piebald, Converge.
Yeah, exactly.
So
yeah, that's awesome that you listen to the Piebald record. That's just so funny. I'm looking at it like right here.
Nice.
And he wrote, "I'm part of it." He signed his name. But so okay, you guys you went on the band basically. What you guys called it, right? Was it breakup or hiatus? Like, and then you obviously come back in 2017, 2018.
It was, Jeff, why don't you lay out the scene?
We're playing a show in, I think, New Jersey, and with the assistant. Yep, it was another weekend. We were playing there, and then the next day we were going to play, or 2 days later, we're going to play in Boston at the Middle East.
With World Inferno Friendship Society.
Yep. And Arcaro, which is a friend of mine, Joe Grimm's band. And Erik just stands up. Erik would usually address the audience during each show, and he stands up and he's like, yeah, I just want to say this is our second to last show ever. With no discussion with Nick and I, and we were just like, Nick and I just like, what?
Oh, wow.
It was bad.
It made for an interesting ride home, I think.
Yeah, it was bad. It was bad.
Yeah, it was not great. And I was really mad at Erik for a couple of years.
Yeah.
I felt like I had the rug ripped out from under me, because this was all I had was this band. And I put everything into it. And
yeah, it was an interesting time because I think just as young kids, I mean, obviously I would never do that to anyone now. Like that's such a slap across the face. It's just like, it's just not the way you do it. But I think back then I was definitely in a different frame of mind. I was just a fucking angry kid who was bitter. And I don't know, for some reason I thought that was what to do. Like that's we've always, as a band, we've always kind of pushed the buttons, but I think as an individual, I was always someone who just like wore the chip on my shoulder a little bit more visible than I probably should have. And then it came to the point where I actually just, I mean, I basically just cut the cord from the thing that we were all collectively working and living and breathing for, those short few years, but they were some of the most formative and intense years of our lives, making this music, making those records, playing those shows in basements across the country and fucking VFW halls. And it was some of the best times of our lives. And then one day I decided to just be like, yeah, this is it. And that was obviously such a slap across the face to Jeff and Nick, but for some reason in my frame of mind, I just didn't, it was really selfish of me. And I think, like, when you're playing this type of music, or when you're playing any kind of music that actually just means fucking like the world to you, and this band means the world to us. When we were younger and we were in it, like just fucking completely immersed in it, when you're young and you are growing up, you are changing. When you're 19 or 20 years old, you're experiencing all of these different feelings, and you're experiencing change within yourself. And for some reason, again, I handled it in a very like inelegant way, very, very like unprofessional. But there was something in me where I'm like, I just gotta stop. I have to fucking stop. I have to get away from this. And like, I kind of just left punk altogether. Like I just pieced out, I like eventually moved to New York. I went to school. I had a completely different life for 15 years, like living in New York. Didn't think about really punk at all. Like occasionally I would dip into it and kind of see what was going on, but I didn't really have any involvement. And I didn't really keep in touch with anyone that I had made friends with during those years. And but the fast forward to kind of the return of it, when myself, Jeff, and Nick, we spoke on the phone for the first time in 2017, because it kind of marked the 20 years that we had started this thing. So I'm like, okay, let's find Nick, let's get on the phone, and let's just reminisce about those days. And one thing led to another, and then the idea of getting in a room together came up, and like playing music again. And it was then when I realized, like, oh, I need to have this back in my life. And I can tell that that was the same for Jeff and Nick. So we kind of just manifested this whole thing of like returning. We had no idea it was going to become sort of what it became. But at the time it's like, yeah, let's fucking make it happen. Let's tap back into this thing and see what happens. And we did, and things happened like bigger and better than we could have expected. But then a pandemic happened. Right. And we're like, okay. And then so kind of what we were saying earlier, we kind of got back to bass during the pandemic, and we started it back up. And then we found ourselves in this rhythm again, and we found ourselves in this really like, rich creative headspace. And so we stuck with it. We were in the rehearsal space, once a week, twice a week, sometimes every fucking week for months. Like over a year, we were doing that. That was the thing that we just returned to, me, Jeff, and Sean. Mm-hmm. Sean joined the band during the early days of the pandemic, because we originally invited Sean to play with us, to be second guitarist, to accompany Nick.
Oh, okay.
That was the intention. But because the three of us are here in San Francisco and Nick is in Connecticut, I think there were just challenges that revealed themselves that just made it so difficult to make it work as a four-piece. Mm-hmm. And, the band just has its own inertia, basically. And so the three of us, Sean, myself, and Jeff, just kept going, and it evolved. And so here we are, and this is the new chapter of the band. And it's weird because it feels like a new band, even though it's been a band for a long time. But this is like a reset. This is we're at the starting line now, and it's crazy to think that, but that's what this new record became for us. It's like the starting line. It's like the new chapter, basically. So it's it would take hours to kind of walk through all the history and the stories and the things. But when you look back at how much history this band is sort of attached to and all the other bands that we are associated with, when you fast forward to now, it's like, fuck, like we're about to embark on this whole other thing
Yeah.
at an entirely different capacity. And it's like, that's wild to us because we still feel like the fucking underdogs. We still feel like the kids that like have that chip on their shoulder. It's like, no, we're here too. Like we could fucking play. Like,
Right.
Yeah. And while Eric's saying all this, it's reminding me that an idea I have about this band is it's its own independent being. It uses us to do what it needs to do. You know, we're not the band. The band is it uses us. You know, it's its own living, breathing thing, and that's really important when you listen to it to hear that. You know, I'm my own person, Eric's his own person, but then we get into a room, and then the band happens, and so
Yeah. With this album, I mean, you guys, put out the LP, and then you did some touring, and then all that was kind of taken away, and then it was like a reset for this album. Did you go into like the songwriting or the lyrics or anything? Was it a totally different headspace approaching this record than even the LP? And I'm sure, 18 years before that, different than that record.
Yeah.
like in what way? Like, I mean, obviously, I guess that wasn't a very good question. I meant like, when it came to, was it more, I guess, what were you kind of pulling from? Is it the same strings that you would just when you were younger, or from that, or did you go in a different direction at all?
Well, I mean, from the place inside me, I'm still tapping into things that I've carried since childhood. I just have a different perspective on things now. I'm a parent now, and had a lot of life experience, and a lot of challenges through the years, and so I'm tapping into a lot of that. But also it's interesting because when I was young, everything felt so hopeless. And in today's world, it seems like it should feel hopeless. And maybe because I look at my son and I see things through that kid lens again. There is a sort of hopefulness, and I don't know. I mean, so I like the darkness of my life is melding with the hopefulness that I have for my son and other young people, and not just little kids, but teenagers and 20 somethings, and just all of us really. I'm trying to approach things from that hopefulness while still having that darkness, and seeing that sort of in the periphery of life, that people, they're trying to keep it at bay. They're trying to just live their day to day. That's sort of the headspace that I was in, at least lyrically, writing this record.
And
Eric,
I was gonna say, just to find joy kind of in today's, it's not like the world has gotten any better since, when you were writing those original records, or even in 2019. So it's like, it's interesting that you're, kind of finding that joy, or just a balance, I guess, in this album.
Well, it also could be just the fact that we're able to do it again. I mean,
true.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go ahead, Jeff.
Well, like we were talking about earlier, when I said that it felt like I had the rug ripped out from under me. This was the only thing I really ever had. This is the best thing of my life. I've got my son and my wife, and that's something else. But as far as just everything else about my life, this is the thing that has been what gets me out of bed every day and makes me feel good, and like I'm a whole person, and so there's that, just being able to come back to it. So and not taking it for granted. I think that that's part of it too. So
Yeah, I think my view of how this record came about and how these songs were assembled and all that, it was a thing where, you know, we did make this during the pandemic. We were in isolation. Everyone was. And it was the one thing that we had to look forward to every week as far as what would satiate our creative needs. And it was just so nice to get in a room with Jeff and Sean and to like, you know, like have our time together as friends, but then also be completely aligned from a creative standpoint. And we just ended up making, you know, we would be in our rehearsal space, we would like hang out and like chat for a bit, and then we would just start working on something, and that thing would become you know, an idea or a couple of parts working off of each other, and then suddenly another part would be introduced, and you know, we would find ourselves creating songs that were really like kind of like happening. You know, they weren't just like ideas. It's like, oh, we're actually assembling songs here. This is becoming like, I think we're making a record. Like, you know, we didn't really like say, okay, we're going to get in the rehearsal space and we're going to write a record. It just happened. And we found ourselves in this consistent rhythm that led us to that. And I think you can't help but be affected by the circumstances of isolation. You can't help but be affected by the circumstances of life being completely disrupted. Can't help but be influenced by the ambiguity of the world. And this was all kind of fused into this music. And I think from a musical standpoint, in addition to, you know, Jeff's lyrical content, I think this record, the songs, yeah, they're, I mean, this is probably one of the heaviest records we've made. 100%, you know. And it's not like, oh, heavy breakdown, like mosh heavy. It's like heavy, you know, just it there's a heaviness to it. There is a very real intention to every single aspect of these songs. But in a weird way, to what Jeff's saying about the idea of hope, is I think there's glimmers of it throughout the record. And I think that's reflective of us actually being able to make this thing. You know, it's like, it's heavy, it's angry, it's sad, it's confused, it embodies all of these feelings that I think most of us have been having these past few years. But it's also like, well, fuck yeah, we're doing it, and we're making something happen. And when we kind of assembled the group of songs and we listened to it, you know, from start to finish, it's like, wow, this is a really angry record. But at the same time, there's like joy in the chaos that we've created. It's like we've created chaos within the chaos. And the nice thing about it is that this is our chaos, and it's really nice to be in it. It's like healthy chaos. And I think all of the hard work and the suffering, you know, night after night, you know, hour after hour of just unrelenting, you know, writing and rehearsing and preparation to actually record this thing. Yeah, it really just captured the moment, you know. And that's what I'm really grateful for, is that we were able to make something that we're super proud of. Like I'm personally like the most proud of this thing than anything else we've ever done as a band. And I think it's because of the cohesion that we felt ourselves falling within, because it's the first time in over 18 years that we were in proximity to each other for once. You know, like we were actually in the same city, and we were able to rehearse consistently. And it just captured that. It's like everyone was in isolation, but we were still able to come together and make this thing. And yeah, I think it's wild that we pulled it off, but we did, and here we are. And you know, we're privileged to like talk to people like you and be able to just share it and have you like, you know, ask a couple of questions about it. It's like, for me, that's wild and that's awesome. So, you know.
Well, I'm excited to hear the rest of the record. I think you've put out like 3 or 4 songs, I believe, from
Yeah,
the album.
three songs, but we released the fourth video of the first single that we released, which is called Stretched Invisible from London.
Mhm.
We actually like shot a proper video for it with our friend Evan Henkel, who is also in Loma Prieta, but he's also a sick filmmaker. And you know, that was another example of just people rallying and making it happen, you know, for the sake of making it happen, for creative sake. You know, it wasn't like a big budget video at all, but
Mhm.
we all came together to make something that we were super proud of. And he rallied a small crew who was down to just make it happen, and we made something together. And you know, so yeah, you should check that video out. It just came out yesterday,
Oh
right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think they, yeah, I haven't had a chance to see it, but I
Yeah.
think Shane said something about it. You
Oh,
guys had a
cool.
video
Yeah.
coming out, but I thought it was coming out today or later today.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
I'll check it out after this
Yeah.
call.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome that you know, it's totally, I'm sure, a different approach as far as everything goes. Just, you know, looking back 18 years to how music is coming out now with, you know, having to do all the social media and the videos and everything has to be, you know, so I don't know, it's just an interesting I bet for you guys having to kind of adapt to that with, you know, this new music, it's quite, it is a bit different than
It's
just putting the record out, touring it, putting the record out.
Yeah, and we didn't even do that when we were kids. You know, we would put out a record and then we'd be on to like new music. Like
Okay.
we never had a record cycle, you know?
Okay.
Yeah.
Like
We wouldn't
that
play
never
any of the
happened.
old songs.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is the first time that the band is actually aligned with what we're going to be touring and what we're putting out. Like, what a concept, you
That's
know?
awesome.
Yeah, it only took 20 years, but here we are.
Well, I can't wait to see you guys. You guys are playing a club I've never been to here. I've only been here for 2 years, but I think it's dark. You're playing Dark Matter in Nashville, but I've never been there, so I'm excited to come check
Nice.
you all out there.
Yeah, it'll be super
And
fun.
and thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. This has been such a blast of, you know, getting to know you guys and hearing your story. And I'm stoked on the new record, and it's awesome that you're back together and doing this. So
Yeah,
thank you.
thanks for having us.
Yeah, I have one more
Super
quick
fun.
question before I let you guys go, though. I want to know
Absolutely.
if I can get an answer from both of you. If you have any advice for aspiring artists.
Mm. Don't quit ever. Just keep doing it. Just even if you don't think it's the right thing, if it's giving you something, some kind of purpose, just keep doing it. And eventually you're going to find yourself being like, yes, this is the right thing that I need to be doing. And that's the best kind of art, is the art that is true to you. You know, it doesn't matter if anybody else connects to it. It's what matters to you, and that is what makes the world a better place and makes the art very rich.
Yeah, I think that's very much it, because you know, we do get a lot of DMs or messages of like, oh, what microphone does Jeff use, or how does Jeff scream that way, or what cymbals do you use, or what guitar pedals does Sean play with? It's like, you can ask all of these questions, but that's not going to get you to where you think you're going to go. Like you have to figure out your own voice by doing it yourself. You have to put in the fucking hours, put in the days, put in the months, put in the years. But to Jeff's point, you got to do it because you feel like you have to do it. You know, look for inspiration, of course, everywhere. Absorb your surroundings. But you have to make sure that you're connected with your own creative impulse or impulses. It's like if you look outward for the thing that kind of jump starts the doing, you can probably create something, but it might be missing that real depth that I think, you know, anything worth listening to has, or worth experiencing in terms of art or any creativity. It's like, just do it for you, and don't put so much value on what other people think, even though it's really nice to have validation, of course. Like, you know, we're humans, so of course we make something, we want to get a response. and ideally a favorable one from people from the thing you make. But that comes after, it's like we made this record, and no one has heard it in its entirety yet. But as far as I'm concerned, people could shit on it or like give it a bad review, and I might be like a little bit hurt by it just because, but I'll get over it in a couple seconds, because at the end of the day, I know that we couldn't have done any better or any more, like we couldn't have approached it any more authentically. And so any aspiring musicians or creatives or artists or whatever, just do you, and know that the process itself, as cliche as it sounds, that's where it's at. It's loving the process, loving the grind, loving the suffering, and everything else, all the podcasts and the press and the shows and the records and the hanging out with people all over the place. Those are really cool things and just a part of it, but that will all come. Just create your foundation and believe in it, and know that if you're staying true to your creative impulses and tendencies, you'll be just fine. That's where the success really is. And that's it.